They said the old man died with nothing. 20 years he crawled into that hole in the hills, and 20 years the town of Bitter Creek laughed. There goes the mad Chinaman, digging for gold that God forgot to put there. When he finally didn't come back down one winter, nobody rang a bell. They divided up what little he owned in an afternoon and forgot his name by spring. All he left behind was a girl who couldn't have been more than 15, a cave everyone swore was empty, and one half-blind donkey too stubborn to lie down and die. The whole town figured she'd be gone in a month, starved out or run out. They were wrong about the girl. They were wrong about the donkey. And they were dead wrong about that cave, because when it finally gave up what the old man had spent his whole life protecting, there wasn't a single mouth in Bitter Creek that could form a word. This is the story of what came out of that hill. It's not the story you think it is. Stay with me to the end, because the part that left everyone speechless isn't the treasure. It's why he never told a soul. The rain came down like it meant to drown the year, and there in the middle of it was a girl trying to dig a donkey out of the mud with her bare hands. I saw her from the ridge road. I've been up counting my dead, that's the honest word for it. I ride out and I count how many head the drought has finished since the last time, and I write the number in my ledger like the number is going to do something. 41. 41 steers gone to dust in bad water, and I was writing it small so it would hurt less, when I looked down through the rain and saw movement at the mouth of Wu's old claim. At first I thought it was an animal. Then I saw it was a person on their knees, and the animal was the donkey, halfway down in a wash of collapsed slope, braying that low broken sound they make when they've given up on being brave. I should tell you plain, I did not go down there to be kind. I went down because I have a bad habit of finishing what I start looking at, and I'd started looking. My knees told me the whole way down what they thought of the idea. She heard my horse and spun around, and I have never in my life seen a face do so many things at once. Fear, first, the fear that's just muscle memory in this country, the fear a young thing has when a big man comes out of the rain. Then something harder. She put herself between me and that donkey. 15 years old, soaked through, hands raw and packed black with mud to the wrist, and she planted herself like she was going to fight me over an animal that couldn't stand up. "He's mine," she said, accent under the words but the words plain enough. "He's mine. I ain't after your donkey, girl." "Then go." I want you to understand something about Bitter Creek in those years so the rest of this sits right. We were dying. 3rd year of drought, the creek we were named for gone to a green trickle you wouldn't wash your feet in, and when men are watching everything they own turn to bone, they get mean in a particular direction. They'd got mean at the Chinese. It's easier to hate a face than a sky. Old Wu had lived up in that hill 20 years, and the town tolerated him the way you tolerate a stain on a wall you've stopped seeing. His people had built half the rail line that made anybody $1 in that county, and the thanks for it was to be told, quiet and constant, that they weren't wanted the moment the work was done. So when I stood there in the rain and the girl told me to go, she wasn't being rude. She was being smart, smarter than me. But that donkey was going to die where it lay, and something about the way she kept one hand on its neck the whole time, not pulling, just resting there, like she was telling it she hadn't left, something about that put a bend in me. "You dig on that side, you'll bring the rest down on top of him," I said. "And you, look where the water's cutting, it wants to go there." I got down off my horse and my knees announced it to the county. "Rope's on my saddle. You're going to hate every minute of this, and so am I." It took us the better part of 2 hours. I'd like to say we worked in some fine partnership, but the truth is we fought the whole way. Not each other, the mud, the slope, the animal's own panic. She was small, but she did not stop, not once, not to breathe. Every time I thought she'd used herself up, she'd find a new bottom to her strength that I didn't have, and I'm 3 times her size. By the end I was sitting in the wash with the rope burning through my gloves, and she was under the donkey's chest heaving up with her whole back, and I heard myself say, now, "You beautiful, ugly idiot, up." And the donkey came up out of the mud with a sound like the earth letting go of something it wanted. She got him up onto the flat, and then this girl who had not made one soft sound in 2 hours put her forehead against that muddy donkey's neck and shook, just for a second. Then she caught it, wiped her face with a filthy hand which did nothing at all, and looked at me like she'd caught herself doing something shameful. "His name is Bao," she said, like she owed me that for the rope. "My uncle's name for him. It means treasure. He thought it was funny to name a poor man's only donkey treasure." "Old Wu was your uncle." She went careful again. "You knew him." "I knew of him," I said, which was the coward's version, and we both heard it. "I'm Elia's roan. Most everyone left alive who'd bother calls me Eli. I ran cattle east of town, and I was 61 years old that spring, and I had buried a wife named Cora, and I do not talk about the rest of it. And I mention myself only so you'll trust that what I'm telling you I saw with my own 2 eyes, because there's a part coming that people don't believe." Her name was Mei-Ling, May. I got the shape of her story over the next weeks in pieces, the way you get anything true out of a proud person, sideways, and never when you ask. Her people had come over for the rail work like Wu had, and the fevers and the years had taken them one by one until it was just her, working a kitchen in a bigger town 2 valleys over, 14 years old and pouring out slop for men who wouldn't look at her. Then word came that her great uncle Wu had died alone in his claim in the hard part of winter, and that under the law we're all so proud of, what he had was hers. What he had was a hole in a hill and a donkey named Treasure. The county clerk, a decent enough man named Pettigrew who was decent right up until it cost him anything, had written it out for her plain. The claim was hers to work, but a claim you don't work you lose, and there were men in Bitter Creek who could count the days as well as she could. She had come to a town that did not want her, to sleep in a dead man's dugout, to keep an animal alive on a mountain that had killed its owner, all to hold onto a piece of ground everyone agreed was worthless. "Then why'd he stay 20 years? I asked her once. We were sitting outside the cave mouth. She was mending Bao's rigging with wire because she had no leather and no money for leather. She didn't answer right off. She had a way of going somewhere in her face before she'd tell you something that mattered. "He wrote to us," she said. "Every year one letter. My mother read them to me before she'd read them out. He never asked us to come. He never said he was rich. He never said he was poor. He just said," she stopped, started the wire again. "He said there is something in this hill that is worth more than they know. I am keeping it for someone who will understand." Every letter the same line. My mother thought his mind had gone soft. She loved him, but she thought, you understand. An old man alone, telling himself stories about gold. "You don't think that?" "I think," she said, and pulled the wire tight with her teeth, "that a man does not spend 20 years keeping a thing for a person who is worth nothing to keep it for." I didn't have an answer to that. I've turned it over a lot of nights since. Now I have to tell you about the town, because May's whole war was with the town, and I was for a good long while on the wrong side of it without lifting a finger, which is its own kind of wrong. When she went to Hobbs' store for flour and salt, the only store, Hobbs weighed her out short and charged her long, and when she pointed at the scale he told her the scale was fine and the door was there. When she carried her water up the hill from the town well like everyone did, a couple of the Marsh boys got in the habit of accidentally tipping her buckets and laughing, and their daddy watched from the porch and did nothing, which taught them everything. When she buried Wu proper, she'd found where they'd rolled him into a shallow scrape without a marker, and she dug him up and buried him again herself, on the claim. With her own 2 hands and a marker she carved, the preacher wouldn't come up the hill to say a word over him. I heard about all of it in town, told as a joke. You hear the little China girl dug up the old man. Laughter. And I sat in Dell's with my coffee, and I did not laugh, but I also did not stand up, and I want that on the record, because a lot of men in these stories are always brave. I wasn't. I was a tired old man who decided a long time ago that the world was going to do what it was going to do, and my standing up wouldn't change the weight of it by an ounce. What changed me wasn't a moment of courage. It was the ledger. I keep accounts of everything. It's the one thing my father gave me that stuck. You write it down. You can't lie to yourself about where you stand. And one evening I was doing my sums, 41 dead steers and the cost of hay I couldn't buy and the price of water hauled in barrels, and I found myself, God knows why, writing a different account underneath. What the town charged me for flour against what it charged me. What her uncle's rail work had earned the county against what his grave had gotten him. And when I set those numbers side by side in my own hand, in my own book, where I couldn't tell myself I'd misremembered, I couldn't stand it. A number won't let you look away the way a face will. I rode up the hill the next morning with a sack of good flour, a proper honest weight, and I set it down and I said, "Store shorted you. This makes it square." And it was a lie. The store hadn't shorted her that much, but she looked at the sack and then at me, and she understood it was an apology from a man who didn't know how to make one, and she let me have the lie. She fed me tea made from Wu's own tin, thick and bitter, out of one of 2 cups. And that was the start of me being on the right side of it, which I'd like to claim as decency, but was really just a man who couldn't argue with his own arithmetic. She worked that cave like it owed her a debt. I helped when my ranch let me, which by high summer was more and more, because there wasn't much left of my ranch to tend. And I learned the shape of what Wu had done up there, and it stopped my breath a little. The cave was no natural cave. It had been worked, but not like a mine. A mine follows a vein of ore, it chases money through the rock, it goes where the gold is. Wu's diggings didn't go where any gold would be. I've prospected. I know the country. He'd driven his tunnel down and back, away from every likely seam, into dead granite, deep into the mountain, in a direction that made no sense at all if what you wanted was to get rich. He was mad, I said before I could stop myself. Standing in that tunnel with a lantern, looking at 20 years of a man's life carved into stone that couldn't pay him back. May, I'm sorry, but look at where he dug. There's nothing back here. There's nothing possible back here. She held the lantern up to the wall, and in the light I saw what I'd missed. Marks, all along the tunnel, low down where a man would put his hand to steady himself. Chinese characters, hundreds of them, scratched patiently into the rock over the years. "What's it say?" I asked. She ran her fingers along them, reading, and her voice when it came was very quiet. "Dates," she said, "the wet years. He wrote down every year it rained proper and every year it didn't." She moved down the wall. "This one says the creek was full to the willow this spring." She moved again. "This one no rain since the plum blossom, second dry year." And on, a man alone in a mountain keeping the weather like I keep my dead cattle, writing it down so he couldn't lie to himself. Her hand stopped at the deepest mark, the one nearest where the tunnel ended in a wall of stone he'd been working when he died. She read it and didn't translate it. "May. It says," she told me, and her jaw was tight, close now for her. The hair went up on my arms in that cold tunnel. "Close to what, girl?" She turned and looked at me, and for the first time since I'd pulled her donkey out of the mud she looked young. Just a girl in a hole in the ground, holding a dead man's lantern. "I don't know," she said, "but he wasn't mad. Look how straight he dug. A mad man doesn't dig straight. He was going somewhere, he knew where, and he ran out of," her voice caught on it. "He ran out of time by this much. He was close by this much." She put her palm flat against the stone at the end of the tunnel, against the last thing her uncle ever touched. And that's when we heard the men on the slope outside, and Deputy Coyle's voice calling up the hill, easy and pleased with himself, saying, "Miss, you want to come on down here. There's some paper you're gonna need to hear about." The paper was this. There's a thing in mining law about diligent work. A claim isn't yours because a dead man left it to you. It's yours because you work it, and there's a value of work you have to prove by law each year, in labor or in dollars, and if you can't, Another man can file on top of you and take the ground right out from under your feet, legal as Sunday. It's a law built for exactly this, for the strong to eat the weak and call it commerce. And a man named Amos Kettle had filed. Kettle owned the freight line and half the mortgages in the county, and he had a lawyer's letter, and he had the deputy to carry it. And the letter said that a 15-year-old girl had not performed the required annual labor value on the Wu claim. Never mind that she'd been keeping herself and an animal alive on nothing. Never mind she'd moved more rock in 3 months than most men move in a year. And that she had 30 days to prove up or the claim reverted, at which point Mr. Kettle, generous soul, was prepared to file. I stood there in the sun with the deputy, and I finally understood why Kettle wanted a hole everybody swore was empty. Because everybody was wrong about it being empty. And Kettle, who owned the freight and the mortgages and had ears in the clerk's office, had started to wonder, same as I was starting to wonder, standing in that tunnel with the hair up on my arms. What does a sane man dig straight into a mountain for 20 years? The town thought Wu had been chasing gold that wasn't there. Kettle had started to think maybe the old man had been keeping something. And the beautiful part from Kettle's side was that he didn't have to find it first. He just had to run out one skinny orphan's clock, take the ground legal, and dig at his leisure. 30 days. Coyle handed her the letter. She couldn't read all the lawyer words, but she got the shape of it, and I watched her get it, and I watched something in her go very still and very old. You can't work it out, Coyle said, not unkind, just certain. It's not a thing a girl your size does in 30 days. Nobody'd blame you. Mr. Kettle'll even give you a fair price for the donkey. He almost smiled. More'n it's worth. She folded the letter, small and again, until it was a hard little square, and she put it in her pocket. Then she looked past all of us up the slope to the black mouth of the cave where her uncle had spent 20 years digging straight into stone for her and getting close by this much and running out. 30 days, she said. And she turned around and started back up the hill. Coyle laughed a little to the men. I didn't, because I'd been in that tunnel. I'd read the last mark her uncle made, and I knew something the deputy didn't, standing there in the sun. That girl wasn't walking back up to pack. She was walking back up to finish it. She had 30 days to do what a strong man hadn't finished in 20 years, and she started that same afternoon, and I stood at the bottom of the hill and told her it couldn't be done. I know how deep that stone is, I said. I've swung a hammer in country like this my whole life, May. The wall he was working, that's not a day's granite. A crew with powder couldn't cut it in 30 days. You've got you, a girl and a blind donkey. He's not blind, he's half blind. She was already lashing the pick to bow's rigging, and I have you. You don't have, I stopped. She'd said it flat like a fact of the weather, and it landed on me flatter still. I have you. 61 years old and a stranger's orphan had counted me into her sums without asking, the way you count on a wall being where it was yesterday. I want to tell you I said something fine. I didn't, I said, my knees are shot and I've got a ranch dying, which was true. And then I said, I'll bring my long bar and the good hammer at first light, which was also true, and the first thing had only been my mouth arguing with what the rest of me had already decided. So began the 30 days. I'm not going to pretty it up. It was the hardest labor of my life, and it damn near killed the both of us, and there were mornings I hauled myself up that slope, hatting her a little for making me feel obliged to try something impossible. We worked in shifts on the wall, one swinging while the other cleared, Bow dragging the broken rock out in a sledge Wu had built years back and left leaning like he'd known it'd be wanted again. The dust got in everything. My hands split and healed wrong and split again. Her palms turned to something that wasn't skin anymore. We measured our whole lives in inches of granite, and some days we made none, the hammer just ringing off the stone and shivering up your arms into your teeth, and you'd swing again anyway because stopping meant Kettle, and Kettle meant the end of her. And here is the thing the town would never have believed, watching from below. I stopped, somewhere in the second week, working to keep a girl from losing a worthless hole. I was working to find out what a dead man had been keeping. Wu had got into me the same as he'd got into Kettle, the same fever, the same question. What do you dig straight into a mountain for 20 years, for a person you've never met? On day 19, we found the seam of soft rock. You have to understand what that meant. 20 years Wu drove through hard granite, and there at the end, right where his last mark was close now for her, the granite gave way to a band of softer stuff, a decayed vein, rotten and crumbling, that a pick went into like bad cheese. He'd been 3 feet from it. 3 feet. He'd spent 20 years to get within 3 feet of easy going, and his heart or the winter took him with 3 feet left. May sat down in the tunnel when she felt the pick go soft. Just sat, in the dust, in the lantern light. And she cried, not the caught quick way from the mud that first day, but the whole way for a while, and I let her. And I found I had water on my own face and blamed the dust, and she let me have that lie the way I'd let her have the flower. He knew, she said. That's why he wrote close now. He'd hit the change in the rock. He knew he was nearly through. He went asleep that winter 3 feet from it, and he knew. Then let's finish what he started, I said. My voice didn't come out right. For him, come on girl, up. 9 days left, soft rock, and we dug like the mountain owed us blood. We broke through on the 29th day. I felt it before I saw it. The pick went through into nothing, into open air, and a smell came out of the hole that I will not forget if I live to be 100. Cold. Cold and wet and green, deep earth green, the smell of a thing that has never once seen the sun. May got the lantern. We widened the hole enough to put our heads through, side by side, and we looked into the space her uncle had spent his whole life reaching for. I've tried a lot of ways to say what was in there, and none of them are big enough. It was a chamber. A cavern opened out inside the hill, and across the bottom of it, dark and still, and clear as glass in the lantern light, was water. A pool of it, deep, fed by some seep from farther in the mountain. A spring locked in the rock since before there was a town or a drought or a country to fight over it. Cold, sweet water in a land 3 years dying of thirst. Water where the creek had gone to a green trickle, where my cattle were dropping in the dust, where men were hauling barrels 40 miles and paying like it was whiskey. Not gold. Water. And in a drought in that country in that year, water was a thing there wasn't gold enough in the world to buy. May made a sound I can't spell. She reached down and put her hand in it and drew it back and put it to her mouth, and I saw her whole face change in the lantern light. Because it was sweet, it was living water, it was real, and she started, God help me, to laugh. Standing waist deep in her dead uncle's 20 years, laughing and crying at once with a wet hand pressed over her mouth. He wasn't keeping gold, she said. He was keeping this. He knew the dry years were coming. He wrote them down. He watched the creek fail year after year, and he dug toward the water. He was digging us a well. He was, her voice broke clean apart. He was keeping us alive, a thing worth more than they know, for someone who will understand. Eli, it was never treasure, it was water. He knew we'd need water before we knew we'd need anything at all. I sat down on the cold stone, an old rancher who counts his dead cattle in a ledger, and I thought about a man alone in a mountain for 20 years, mocked by a whole town as mad, chasing not a fortune for himself but a spring for a great niece he'd never met, keeping the weather on the walls so he wouldn't lose faith, dying 3 feet short and knowing it, and never once in 20 years telling a single soul what he was really after. Why didn't he tell? I asked her. It's the thing that leaves you speechless when you sit with it, not the water, the silence. May was quiet a long time. Because if they knew there was water in the hill, she said finally, they would have taken the hill, you know they would. A poor girl can inherit a worthless hole. She cannot inherit a spring in a drought. He kept it secret so it would still be there to leave to me. He let them call him mad for 20 years so no one would come looking. He let them laugh so I could live. There is no gold in the world worth that. There isn't. Now here is where I have to tell you about the morally heavy thing. Because a story where the good win clean is a lie, and I told you at the start I'd give it to you straight. We had the water, we had 1 day left. And we had a choice, and it was an ugly one. Because the law didn't care about water. The law cared about proved-up labor value, and we'd done the labor, we could prove it. But the second the town learned what was in that hill, every calculation changed. Kettle didn't need to run out her clock anymore if he could just take it. And a man with the freight line and the mortgages and the deputy in his pocket has 100 ways to take a thing from a 15-year-old girl that have nothing to do with law. He could burn her out. He could have Coyle find a reason. He could offer the town what it was dying for, water, on the condition they help him take it. And a thirsty town does not stay on the side of an orphan against the man who owns the well. May saw it before I did. If I tell them, she said that night, sitting outside the cave with Bow's head resting against her shoulder, they take it. If I don't tell them, I keep it, and the town dies of thirst at the bottom of the hill. My cattle, your cattle, the marsh boys who tipped my water, the preacher who wouldn't bury my uncle. Children, Eli, there are children in that town. Then keep it quiet, I said, and I meant it, God forgive me. You don't owe them one drop, look what they did to you, look what they did to him. She sat with the donkey a long while. He didn't dig it for me, she said at last, slow like she was working it out as she went. Read the wall again. He wrote for her, but he meant more than me. A man doesn't watch a whole country die of thirst for 20 years and keep the cure for one person out of spite. He kept it secret to protect it, not to hoard it. He was keeping it until it could do the most good and not be stolen. She looked at me. If I keep it out of hate, I make his 20 years mean the same small thing they think it meant. I won't do that to him. I have turned that night over more than any other. A girl with every reason on this earth to let a cruel town choke, sitting in the dark deciding to save it anyway. Not because they deserved it, they didn't, but because her uncle would have. And because the only way to make 20 years of a mocked man's life mean something was to make it mean the largest thing it could. That's not a soft mercy. That's the hardest kind. The kind you choose with your teeth gritted, giving good to people who gave you nothing. But she wasn't a fool. She made me ride to the county seat that same night, 40 miles, my knees be damned, and drag Pettigrew the clerk out of his bed. And she had it done right, proved up, filed, witnessed. The water rights recorded in her name and her name alone, legal past Kettle's reach, before one word got out. She spent her last day of the 30 not digging but papering, nailing the thing down so tight that when the truth broke, no man could pry it loose from a 15-year-old girl. She learned that, I think, from watching what the law had almost done to her. She turned it around and used it like a bar against the rock. And then she let the town find out. I wish you could have seen their faces. The whole point of this story, the thing the title promised, what they revealed left everyone speechless. It wasn't the water quite. It was the town. Standing at the bottom of the hill when it finally understood. She didn't gloat. That's what I remember. She could have. She stood at the mouth of the cave with the papers in her hand and the whole of Bitter Creek down below, Hobbs who'd shorted her flour, the marsh boys who tipped her buckets, the preacher who'd stayed home, kettle purple with a lawyer's letter gone to ash in his pocket, Coyle not knowing where to put his hands, and she told them plain and clear that there was clean water in the hill, more than the town could drink, and that it was hers. And that they could have it. Fair, metered. Enough for every family and every animal, at a price a poor family could pay, run by her and no one else, on ground no man could file on top of ever again. The mad Chinaman's worthless hole. The spring he'd kept for 20 years so it would still be there for a girl who would understand. I watched a town that had laughed at a funeral stand with their hats in their hands in front of a 15-year-old orphan, and not one of them could say a word. Not sorry. Not thank you. Nothing. Because there is no word big enough for what you feel when you learn that the person you scorned was the one who'd been quietly saving your life the whole time, and had every reason to let you die, and didn't. Speechless, the whole reach of them, speechless. Kettle left the county by fall. The preacher, too late by a lifetime, came up the hill and said words over Wu's grave that may let him say because they were for the dead man and not for him. The Marsh boys hauled water for her now and were careful and did not laugh. And Bao Treasure, the half-blind donkey too stubborn to die in the mud. Bao got fat and slow and lived years past when he had any business to, and would stand at the mouth of the cave in the evenings with his head down like an old man remembering, and May would rest her hand on his neck the way she had that first day, not pulling, just there, telling him she hadn't left. I still keep my ledger, old habit, and on the last page of the one from that year I wrote down the number of dead cattle, 41, and under it I wrote the day the water came, and under that, because I couldn't help it, I did one more sum. 20 years a man dug. He never saw the water himself. He died 3 feet short of it in the dark and the cold, believing, I have to think, that he'd failed, that his life had come to nothing, that the town was right about him. He was wrong about that. He was the only thing that whole valley got right in a dry, mean decade. I go up sometimes still, when my knees allow, and I sit outside that cave where a girl once told me to go and I didn't, and I think about how the biggest things a person does they often never live to see. How you plant a spring in the dark for someone you'll never meet, and you go to sleep in the winter believing you're a fool. And I think May knew that, young as she was, better than I did at 61, that a life isn't measured by what you're there to collect. She never did tell me what her uncle's last letter said. The one that came the winter he died, that reached her people after he was already gone. She keeps it folded small in a tin, the same tin the tea came from. I asked her once, she just looked up at the hill. Some things a person keeps,